Here's your host, integrated media professor, longtime Spokane Talk radio personality, and award-winning broadcast veteran, Mike Fitzsimmons.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this edition of For Critical Thinkers. The definition of critical thinking is something we lead off with on each program, and it's simply this: the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. That's the process of critical thinking. And what we attempt to do on this program is to apply the concept of critical thinking to various issues that are of importance to us. Today, we're going to spend some time talking about COVID-19 and the government's imposing of Thanksgiving control measures over citizens and the possibility of a looming shutdown in the country, the constitutionality of the issue, and the truth about what the science actually says. This program is underwritten today by Stephen Major, and we certainly thank our alternative benefactor for his support of this show, Stephen Major. Thank you so much, sir. And also, if you want to participate in the program today live, you can do that. Here is a address that you can email to, Vinny at SpokaneTalksMedia.com, Vinny at SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Now, here's what will happen. If you've got the ability to use a camera and microphone on your computer or your phone, as the case may be, you dial up that particular address, and Vinny will give you a code, a access code, and we'll put you on the air with me. And I'd love to have you do that. We'll give you that particular number or that particular web address three times during the process of the programming. So let's get into it. The government is imposing Thanksgiving COVID-19 measures over citizens. You've probably been hearing about this. And it seems that it's getting crazier and crazier by the minute. There are new guidelines from the CDC. You probably didn't get the memo. It came out a couple of weeks back, but they suggest, it's too late now because Thanksgiving, of course, just a few days away, but they suggest that all of you and your invited guests should quarantine for 14 days before the dinner. Now think about that. Really? Quarantine for 14 days before the dinner. In other words, if you're planning to have Thanksgiving dinner with somebody else, whether it's in your own town or in another city or whatever, you're supposed to quarantine for 14 days. Give me a break. I mean, how ridiculous is that really? How practical, how possible is that for most of us? And also, the CDC is recommending that your Thanksgiving dinner be consumed outdoors. Outdoors. Now, if you've got a nice patio or what have you in the backyard, you live in a temperate climate where it's reasonably warm and comfortable, that might not be a bad idea at all. But most of us don't, and particularly in the central part of the country, northern tier portion of the Pacific Northwest and the Northeast, that isn't going to be practical at all. And the CDC also suggests that everybody wear a mask and maintain 6 feet of space between them, of course, and between all guests. And the new guidance also suggests that you bring your own food and drink to Thanksgiving dinner. Grandma's not supposed to make the dinner. You're supposed to bring your own food and consume your own food, and nobody else touches your food, nor do you touch anybody else's food. And they suggest that everyone wear a mask. And then we have individual governors and mayors who are making their own demands of the public. For example, in New York, Mayor Andrew Cuomo, who just received recently, as you know, a Emmy Award for his briefings on COVID-19, notwithstanding the fact that he sent elderly people to nursing homes to poison their neighbors in the nursing home, and a lot of folks died. Anyway, he gets an Emmy. How that happens, I have no idea, but that's not the point of it today. He has issued restrictions on how many guest citizens are allowed to have in their home for Thanksgiving. And the number that he limits you to is 10 or fewer. In California, Governor Gavin Newsom says that Thanksgiving dinner should be consumed outside, just like the CDC suggests, and that everybody should wear a mask, and that you should remove the mask only when you're taking a bite of your turkey, and then you should return it again to your face in between bites. Really? Newsom has also issued a limited stay-at-home order that's going to impact non-essential businesses in the state of California, particularly in what's known as the purple tier counties. This is an area where the COVID outbreaks have been particularly strong in the last few weeks. And gatherings cannot take place in those counties, and there has to be a curfew between 10 o'clock in the evening and 5 o'clock in the morning, where nobody can go outside or do anything or go anywhere or whatever. This order went into effect last Saturday, and it's expected to last for a month. He's going to rescind it or extend it on the 5th of December, or 21st of December, I should say. And in New Jersey, Governor Phil Murphy has issued new restrictions on bars and restaurants, despite not a single COVID outbreak being traced to any indoor dining or any pubs or taverns in the entire state. No indoor service, though, in any event, is permitted after 10 p.m. Seating at the bar is banned at all times. I guess he thinks that COVID is a nighttime disease, and that after 10 o'clock it just sort of creeps out from the shadows and starts infecting people. In Michigan, the celebrated governor Gretchen Whitmer, who, by the way, is facing a recall election, as signatures are being gathered as we speak, she issued orders for Michiganders to cancel normal Thanksgiving plans. She said families should celebrate only with the members of their immediate household. Just that. The more people we have in our homes, she says, talking and eating and drinking and hugging and yelling at the Detroit Lions, that they usually play, as you know, on Thanksgiving in the NFL, the higher the risk of catching and spreading COVID, she said. And then there's the worst of these. In Oregon, Governor Kate Brown is encouraging residents to call the police on any neighbors who flout state COVID-19 restrictions, which include limiting in-home gatherings to a maximum of 6 people. Think about that one. Does that sort of smack of Nazi Germany? Encouraging you to rat on your neighbors, turn them in. It's unbelievable. I mean, this has gone farther than I would have ever expected it to go, and this is just beyond the pale. And then you have the opposite side of the coin. Fortunately, there is an opposite side of the coin. The governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem, has taken a much more reasonable and rational approach to this whole process. She wrote, and I quote, "Thanksgiving is around the corner, and across the country, families are planning how to celebrate with their loved ones in the midst of COVID-19. In South Dakota, we will not stop or discourage you from thanking God and spending some time together. Some states across the country are imposing restrictions on Thanksgiving celebrations. Some in the media are even looking ahead and planning to cancel Christmas. But I will continue to encourage each and every one of you to exercise personal responsibility and to make your own smart personal choices." Does that not make sense compared to what some of these other Yahoo governors are doing? As you dig in, she says, to enjoy that delicious turkey and stuffing, make sure that everyone in your household is practicing good hygiene. Wash your hands. If someone in your family is in a vulnerable population, then take extra precautions to protect them. So as we come up on Thanksgiving, as that holiday approaches, we're looking at government intruding ever more into our lives, now intruding right through our front and back doors into our living rooms and telling us how we must live. That's way over the line, my friends. If you are a critical thinker, you know that's way over the line. Another lockdown is a possibility also. In some of the states, the lockdowns have never been released, really. But now that Joe Biden appears to be on his way to the White House, he's talking about locking the nation down. And that is the last thing we need. We don't seem to hear about this because the press doesn't call attention to this, but there are a number of lawsuits that have been filed and decisions that have been made by courts that sooner or later are going to be most popular in all of the states and all around the country. Let me give you some rulings that have occurred in federal courts of late. First of all, a judge recently said in a federal court case that even in emergencies, and then underscored especially in emergencies, the Constitution still applies and government officials must follow it. That echoes a statement made by Bill Barr, the Attorney General of the United States, a few months back when he said that the U.S. Constitution is not suspended in time of crisis. Another judge ruled that limits on gathering 25 people or for indoor activities and outdoor activities and gatherings of 250 people maximum, and 25% of the maximum occupancy for houses of worship and for certain businesses or events constitutes a violation of the First Amendment. Yet another court has ruled that stay-at-home orders, which severely restrict when and for what purpose any citizen may leave his or her home, are unconstitutional violations of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Governors and mayors, it seems to me, are pushing citizens to the breaking point. I think we're very close to the point in which the pushback starts in earnest, even though it's begun already. 9 months now of living in fear of COVID-19 has taken a significant toll, I think, on the American people. Many have begun to rebel against government rules that are ostensibly imposed to keep us safe. We're told that this is for your own good. You can't make up your own mind about what to do, and we're not going to trust you to make any decisions whatsoever. We know better than you, so you do what we tell you. This is for your own good. Across the nation, businesses are beginning to defy arbitrary shutdown orders, as you've probably seen. Parents are demanding that their kids return to the classroom for in-classroom learning, and also that they be allowed to engage in sports activity. Hundreds of restaurateurs and thousands of business owners have joined lawsuits to overturn the draconian, dictatorial edicts of governors and mayors in their communities. A growing number of sheriffs and local police chiefs are refusing to issue citations to citizens and business owners who are out of compliance with the authorities' COVID-19 mandates. And by the way, they have raised some of these things to be misdemeanors. There are a number of states, number of communities, number of cities who now have misdemeanor violations for the COVID-19 mandate put out by the executive, whether it be a mayor or a governor. And that amounts to a $1,000 fine or up to $5,000 fine and a year in jail if you're caught not wearing a mask, or if you have a seventh person in your home on Thanksgiving instead of the maximum 6 you're allowed, etc. And believe it or not, in some communities, people are actually going around looking to see if there are violations. We saw in the news just over the weekend a couple of cases in which the health officers of a particular community in, I think it was Pennsylvania, started poking around various businesses. They had no warrants to come in. They brought the sheriffs with them. They attempted to essentially enforce a non-enforceable law, a mandate by a governor or a mayor, not something passed by a legislature where the public had any representation at all in the process. And they were thrown out. They tossed them. They weren't able to commence with that process, but they're doing it anyway. This is beginning to smack of a totalitarian country with respect to these sorts of things. Government leaders are saying, of course, that they're basing their orders on the science. Oh, we're basing it on this. We're not being arbitrary or capricious. This is about the science. But it turns out that the facts just don't support that claim. What is the science? What is the science these people are relying on? It is clearly unsettled at the very best. I'm going to take a time out here. When I come back, we'll talk about the science. And we're going to get into some statistics, and we're going to get into some actual CDC data upon which apparently these orders are being based. And yet at the same time, They don't seem to have any relationship to the science at all. We'll be right back.
Dial in to a virtual gift to the community this Thanksgiving Eve when Homes for You and Lucky Bird Brands bring you Sorry, Wrong Number.
Lean out the window and see the street. Hello? Hello, Albert? Hello? 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 Oh, what's the matter with this phone? Hello? Hello?
This original drama from the golden age of radio puts local actors on a virtual stage to benefit Spokane Civic Theater. Pick up the original 1943 radio thriller, Sorry, Wrong Number, Thanksgiving Eve at 7 o'clock on the Spokane Talks Media and KHQ TV Facebook channels.
Welcome back to this edition of Four Critical Thinkers. Let me show you how you can join us to speak live on the program today. Take a look at this email address, Vinny at SpokaneTalks.media, talksmedia.com rather, Vinny at SpokaneTalksMedia.com. That's how you get in touch with our producer. Vinny will give you a numerical passcode, which will allow you to get on the program. If you have a camera and microphone system with respect to your computer or on your phone, you'd be able to join us live, and we're certainly welcoming you to do that. Also want to thank our sponsor tonight, who is Stephen Major. Stephen making this program possible. As I mentioned to you when we took the break, science, that is supposedly the reason that these people are telling us we must do these things, is unsettled. I mean, it truly is. There is no absolute, unequivocal scientific reality we can point to and say, well, there it is, that's the definitive word, and that's why it has to happen. One of these areas has to do with fear of asymptomatic carriers of COVID, which is one of the central reasons why we're told masks are so necessary, because you don't know whether an individual is actually carrying COVID and can spread it to you, because that individual is asymptomatic, meaning, of course, that he or she doesn't know that they are ill. And since they don't know, you don't know, and therein lies the risk. But we have discovered just in the last few days that science isn't really certain of that either. Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove is the head of the World Health Organization's Emerging Diseases and Zoonist Union. And she addressed this question just yesterday, just Monday of this week. Coronavirus patients without symptoms, she said, are not driving the spread of the virus. World Health Organization officials say that this casts doubt on the concerns by some researchers that the disease could be difficult to contain due to asymptomatic infectors. Preliminary evidence from the earliest outbreaks indicate that the virus could spread from person to person, contact with individuals, even if the carrier never develops symptoms or is unaware that he or she has the virus at all. But the World Health officials now say that while asymptomatic spread can occur, this is not the main way that COVID is being transmitted. Now, this is pretty fresh information. It flies in the face of what we thought before. From the data they have, she goes on to write, it still seems to be rare that an asymptomatic person actually transmits onward to a secondary individual. Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove says that the virus is primarily spread via respiratory droplets when someone coughs or sneezes or they touch a contaminated surface. Now, you know and I know that if you're coughing and you're sneezing, you're not asymptomatic. You know you've got some kind of an ailment. Maybe you think it's just a cold, but that is something that you're aware of. Asymptomatic individuals don't cough and sneeze. Now, while the World Health Organization, which is, as you well know, has said a number of things, some of which proved to be true and some of which proved to be not so true, and their credibility was certainly challenged after they basically covered for China the outbreak of the coronavirus to begin with. But if you are to believe the World Health Organization, and around the world most folks do, that they say then that the asymptomatic person is not the primary carrier of the disease and the one who would spread it to others. And that, however, is not what our own Centers for Disease Control says. The CDC says it's entirely different. They are sticking with what they have held on to for quite some time, which is that coronavirus is spread by any individual who has it, whether they are aware of it or they're not aware of it. And they're sticking to the claim that as much as 50% of all spreading of the disease takes place from individuals who are asymptomatic. So who do you believe? That comes down to who do you believe? Who's telling you the truth? Follow the interests these individuals have. Who do you believe? The CDC at one time told you masks weren't necessary. Now it's telling you masks are necessary, et cetera, et cetera. We have gotten so many mixed signals as citizens in this country and as citizens of the world that it's pretty difficult to put our finger on what to believe and therefore say, all right, this is how I'm going to function. This is how I'm going to live my life. And even more difficult for governments, governors, mayors, etc., to base their policy decisions on actual science that isn't essentially pretty flimsy. So let's look at the data. Spent a lot of time researching the data, and this is data that I researched through yesterday at 12 noon Eastern time. This is CDC materials. This is just raw information. By the way, a lot of people think, you may not have known this, but a lot of people, over 30% of Americans, according to polls, think that if you get COVID-19, you die. Simple as that. You may actually believe that. Nothing can be further from the truth, of course, but a lot of people believe that. If I catch COVID-19, it's going to kill me. In truth, on the aggregate, you have a 99.2% probability that you will not die from COVID-19, no matter what your age is or age category, that you will survive it. That doesn't mean that you won't be damaged by it. Certainly you could be, but that you will survive it. But 30%, 1 in 3 Americans believe they'll die if they get it. That's part of the reason why the cooperation with these ridiculous lunatic governors and mayors is so successful, because these people are scared to death. And by the way, the media has done absolutely nothing to clear the air about any of this. As you know, even on your local newscasts here, night after night after night after night, all we see, we lead with COVID, 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 new cases, new deaths, COVID, 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 COVID. And you'd think that the world is coming to an end, but they don't put any perspective in it. New cases does not mean new deaths, especially when you consider that new cases are going to result in the individual surviving the disease almost 100% of the time. COVID-19 data then. Total cases in the world right now. In the entire world, 12,175,921 as of 12:10 yesterday afternoon Eastern Standard Time. That number's probably changed by a few, as you might imagine, over the last 24 hours. New cases as of yesterday at 12:10 Eastern Time, 147,840 in the United States. This, by the way, is in the United States. 12,175,921. 147,840 new cases. Cases in the last 7 days per 100,000 of the population. Now, understand this. For every 100,000 people that live in the United States, there have been 52 new cases in the last 7 days. 52 new cases. And the total deaths in this country, as of 12:10 Eastern Time yesterday, 255,958. New deaths, as of yesterday, 822. November 23rd, 2020, at 12:10 Eastern Time. Now that's the raw data. And when you look at those numbers, oh my God, 12 million people have this. There are 300 50 million people in this country, and 12 million of them have come down with COVID-19. Think about that. That percentage is really, really small. New cases, 147 a day, 147,000 a day across the 50 states, among 350 million people in the United States. That's a pretty small number. We need that context in order to be able to appreciate just exactly what we're up against here. And what are the factors that increase community spread and individual risk? You heard about these a lot. You could probably repeat them in your sleep. Crowded situations. Crowded situations seem to be a factor that increases community spread and individual risk. That just is simply a function of how many people are in a group that are not common to that group. In other words, if you and your family are COVID-free, then you can't give the disease to each other at all. What has to happen is that in a crowded situation, one or a number of you contracts the disease from somebody else, and then you can give it to your household. So how many people there are in the group that are not common to the group, those are the ones you have to look out for. Some of those are not even going to know, as I mentioned earlier, that they even have COVID. They're asymptomatic. They have no idea that they're even sick. That doesn't mean that they can't infect, but if you listen to the CDC, they say that's not the driving force. That's not the main factor. If you listen to the WHO, they say that. If you listen to the CDC, they say, oh yes, up to 50%, 1 in 2 cases. Close physical contact. What is close physical contact? Well, presumably, it's the opposite of social distancing. Social distancing, we say, is a minimum of 6 feet distance on all sides from an individual. Proximity to persons unknown to be infected create the possibility of your being infected. This is why they say socially distant. If you're outside that radius, then the probability is that if they do cough or they do sneeze, that you would be free from the possibility of breathing in any of the germs that they release in that process. Enclosed spaces, indoors. Enclosed spaces. That refers to indoor venues with no special ventilation. So you know, some of the restaurants who have been otherwise facing the possibility of being closed down have turned to building outdoor enclosures to keep the wind and the cool temperature down. They put some heating systems out there, kind of like patio dining, if you will. But they leave open areas, and some of the local ordinances require that so that there can be an airflow through that particular enclosure. So enclosed spaces with no special ventilation tends to be what the scientists say is potentially dangerous. And then obviously the duration of the exposure itself. How long was somebody exposed to a person or to persons unknown who had been infected? How long were they exposed? If it was just passing them on a street, can you get sick from that? Well, surely if they're coughing or sneezing in your direction, you could. But if they're not, probably there's no likelihood that you will contract COVID-19 from individuals of that description. More perspective now. Let's look at some additional perspective. COVID-19 data about hospitalization and fatalities. These are rate ratios. And they use in the process, the CDC does, the 18 to 29-year-olds who can get COVID, but for the most part tend not to. They seem to be the healthiest. They seem to be the least infectable, if you will. And so they use that as a control group. And then they rate all of the other age groups as a comparison to the control group. That's the process by which they study this. They may not have learned all this because the media spends, a minute and 30 seconds on a story. You don't get that kind of detail. I thought this might be useful for you. So if you're a child under the age of 4 years old, newborn to 4 years old, you have a 4 times lower probability of hospitalization from individuals 18 to 29, and a 9 times lower probability of death from COVID-19. If you're a youngster from the ages of 5 to 17 years old, 6 times lower probability of hospitalization, 16 times lower probability of COVID killing you. If you're 18 to 29 years of age, you're in the control group. If you're 30 to 39 years of age, you have a 2 times higher probability of being hospitalized with COVID and a 4 times higher probability of death, keeping in mind that 99.8% of COVID persons who are known to have had COVID survive it. All right, of all ilks, everybody across the board, the entire aggregate of all these different categories. There's a 4 times higher possibility of death then for the 30 to 39 age, although very few individuals in that age group get COVID as it happens. Between 40 and 49 years of age, there's a 3 times higher possibility of hospitalization and a 10 times higher possibility of death when compared to the control group of 18 to 29 years of age. It gets higher then, of course, as you get older. Between 50 and 64 years, 4 times higher. 30 times higher if you're in terms of the death possibility, 4 times higher in terms of hospitalization. And we have people 50 to 64 who are in hospitals now. So many of them are on ventilators. Many of them are suffering rather acutely from COVID-19. Between 65 and 74 years of age, there's a 5 times higher possibility of hospitalization. There's a 90 times higher possibility of death. So there's a quantum leap, if you will, statistically speaking, even though, as I mentioned, keep in mind, 99%, almost 99% of individuals are likely to survive in any event. That doesn't mean that they will not have complications as a result of the disease. And then the highest of all, that 75 to 84 years range, 8 times higher for hospitalizations and 220 times higher for the probability of death. And by the way, it is in the 78 year of age and above where the highest number, almost 50% of COVID deaths have been recorded. Almost 50% in that higher range. Which brings us to wearing masks. Wearing masks are considered by the CDC and the WHO to some extent as actions that will help you reduce the risk of COVID-19. But just because you're wearing a mask doesn't mean you're safe. How you wear the mask, what the mask is like, and all that sort of thing makes a lot of difference. Wearing a mask, effectiveness depends on the type of mask that you're wearing. Of course, we've heard the N95 mask. That seems to be perhaps the most protection that an individual can be provided, but most of those masks are difficult to come by, not usually on the commercial market very much, and usually are found among health professionals in hospitals and that sort of thing. Surgical masks. These masks are available outside of hospitals, but they're usually used in surgeries in hospitals and in clinics. The cloth mask, the scarf. Now, the cloth mask and the scarf are the things that we wear more than anything else as a population. And therein lies a problem. The condition of the mask is critical. If it's clean and sanitized, or if it's soiled, it makes a difference. And cloth masks tend to be often not sanitized and often rather soiled. People don't do what is recommended, which is wear a mask today, wear a fresh one tomorrow, a fresh one the next day. They'll wear a mask today, they'll put it in their pocket, in their purse, they'll put it in the glove compartment of the car, and they'll wear it again when they think they need to, again and again and again, sometimes for weeks, maybe even longer, before they even put it in the washing machine. And it's how the mask is worn that also determines whether it's protective. Loosely worn masks aren't very protective at all. You might as well not be wearing a mask at all. Nose exposed. And how many times have you seen that? How many times have you seen people wearing a mask over their mouth, but it's not over their nose? frequently removed, handled, moved around by the wearer. You know, I watch professionals on television who are in the media and persons being interviewed by folks in the media, and watch the folks being interviewed. They can be doctors, they can be nurses, they can be EMTs. And what are they doing? They're always fiddling with their mask, and they're touching themselves and what have you. The Centers for Disease Control says if you do that, you are basically exposing yourself to COVID, and you have no real benefit from the mask at all. Social distancing is an action to reduce the risk of COVID-19, as we discussed. Hand hygiene, washing your hands, using hand sanitizer, and then the cleaning and disinfecting of surfaces, frequent sanitizing of surfaces commonly touched by people. These are ways in which we can reduce, if you will, the possibility that COVID can be spread. Interesting what else you can find on the website of the Centers for Disease Control. They put out a daily, this comes out every single day, a daily COVID-19 state and territorial report on cases in the last 7 days. And this information is virtually all that is available for people who are looking at the most damaging states suffering from the possibility of COVID-19 in cases per 100,000. Let's remember that, because it's important to appreciate that the cases are per 100,000. So the worst of all in the last 7 days has been the state of North Dakota, where they have 160 cases per 100,000 in the population. That's a 0.0016, by the way. It's not even 1%. It's a very small fraction of 1%. Next in line is Wyoming at 140.3, and South Dakota at 124.4, and New Mexico at 120.6, and it goes on down, goes on down, goes on down, right? If you're listening or watching from Idaho, Idaho has a 76.6 rating, just a little bit higher than Michigan with a 76.1. If you're living in Washington, then in Washington you'll discover, I get call it up here for you. In Washington, you will discover that you have a 21.3 cases per thousand. These are cases, not deaths, cases per thousand. Cases per 100,000, pardon me. What is the lowest? Well, apart from American Samoa, the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau, which are island nations, of course, or island territories of the United States, the lowest state is Hawaii, 6.6 cases per 100,000 in the population. Well, now it stands to reason that there would be such low numbers in those areas. Why? Well, simply because you can't get there from here. Nobody's flying to Hawaii. Well, excuse me. The governor of the state of Washington and a few of his cronies spent some time over there, as did leaders of California and a variety of other states. Went to conferences over there, lived in $600 hotel rooms each night while you were supposed to hunker down in your home, living in fear of COVID. So I guess they do go there. But the bottom line is that not much travel right now. Therefore, not much contamination of the local population. So total cases then, 12,175,921, 147,840 new cases in the last 7 days, 52 cases per 100,000 in the last 7 days. Total deaths, 255,598. That's the story from the CDC with respect to the stats of this particular disease. And if you note this, if you're aware of this, you realize, and I don't mean to minimize the death of anyone. One death is too many deaths, but the bottom line is that death and disease and the reality of injury and medical ailment and maladies of a number of types happen all the time in this country. We're aware of that. somehow or other, we continue to live despite the fact that this happens. We know that there are vulnerable portions of our population, and we try to protect those vulnerable portions of our population whenever possible. But we cannot protect everybody. We recognize that. We can't hunker down and live in a cave, where nobody comes or goes for a lifetime. First of all, there's no quality of life associated with that. We wouldn't be able to handle that. We'd go stir crazy in no time. In fact, as we speak, just because of the lockdowns, if you will, and the mandates that we're having to deal with in our own homes as we speak. And we're coming to a boiling point on that in this country, I'm afraid. But let's just take a look at something like COVID and see what the stats are on that. Every year, as you know, you're encouraged to get a flu shot. This is not about COVID. This is the flu shot. Now, sometime in the near future, we're told that any one of 4 or 5 manufacturers is going to have a 95% efficient vaccine for COVID-19. When that day comes, we'll see how well that puts the pandemic down. But at this point, we don't have that. We do have vaccines for the flu, though. The CDC estimates that the burden of illness during the 2019-2020 flu season is moderate, with an estimated 38 million people sick with the flu. 38 million. So far, we're at 12 million with COVID. 38 million people sick over the last 12 months with the flu. 18 million of them made visits to healthcare providers up until this time. It'll be more by the end of the year when the statistical range ends. 400,000 hospitalizations took place, and 22,000 fellow Americans have died from flu. 22,000 is a little less than 10% of the number of COVID deaths. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the nastier of the two is obviously COVID, among other things. But one has to ask the question with respect to this, are the COVID statistics actually being overstated? Are all the people in that 255,000 death rate actually people who died of COVID? Or is there something else there that we need to know about in order to be objective in our analysis and in order to evaluate and form a judgment about all of this? The facts show that the evidence is more consistent with the theory that less people have died from COVID-19 than more. And the official figures do not indicate that. They indicate a greater number rather than a smaller. Nevertheless, the extent of the possible overcount is unknown for a variety of reasons. And even if it were as high as, let's say, maybe 50,000 or more, the reality of it is it wouldn't make much of a marked difference in the key measures of the pandemic's severity, because it is a severe pandemic. No one is arguing otherwise. But the question then becomes one of how do we calculate the deaths that we put in the CDC's statistical abstract, and what does it tell us about COVID-19 and the risks that we face? We'll take that up when we return.
Choosing where you get your news is more than just about getting information. It's trusting who you're getting that information from, knowing they care about your community as much as you do, because it's their home too. Counting on them to be where you need them most, and saying we'll help when it seems no one else will. More than a century of combined local experience goes into every day of reporting for you. This is your team at KHQ Local News.
Again, if you want to join us in the last portion of this program, all you have to do is take a look at the little information on the bottom of your screen. Vinny at SpokaneTalksMedia.com is the email address that you send your request to. Vinny will give you a access code, and if you have a camera and microphone on your computer or on your phone, you can get on the line with us and talk live in real time with us on this program tonight. How many people die of COVID, and what percentage of the deaths is actually pure COVID? Well, that number is about 6%, believe it or not. In 6% of the deaths of COVID-19 was COVID itself the only cause of death listed. In the remaining 94% of these cases, people had at least one additional factor contributing to their deaths. Those factors are called comorbidities, some other issue. You've heard some of them discussed in the media, like, for example, diabetes, or heart condition, or blood clotting issues, or lung and pneumonia problems, sometimes triggered by COVID, but sometimes already an ailment before COVID enters the picture. So stated another way, the majority of Americans who died from COVID-19 had some other medical condition on top of the coronavirus at the time of their death. Now, some have accused the medical officials, health officials, of basically bolstering the numbers to keep us fearful. Because if it looked as though the numbers weren't that great, we might come to the conclusion that the risk is not all that high, and thus we wouldn't be interested at all in cooperating with the kinds of directives that were being given by government. Many patients died in hospitals, often intubated on mechanical ventilations with multiple organ failures due to invasive nature of the coronavirus. You see the red spikes. You've seen pictures, drawings, and depictions of coronavirus. You see the circular shape of the cells that appears in the spikes. The red spikes on the surface of the virus wreak havoc. They tear into the body at the cellular level and create significant injury internally. That's one of the major problems associated with coronavirus. But according to the latest CDC information, it's a reality that the coronavirus is a contributing factor in deaths, but not the pure factor in most deaths, not even in the vast majority of deaths. The reality is that you're dealing with a virus that accompanies other causes. There are a number of different types of diseases that individuals can have, autoimmune diseases, for example, lupus, multiple sclerosis, other things, in which the disease they have doesn't kill them, but complications do kill them in time that are essentially associated with the disease because they destroy the autoimmune system in the body, and they can get sick. They can get ill from a variety of different other sorts of illnesses that can take their life, but it's usually not the one that they have specifically. Back to the mask. I told you about the asymmetric or asymptomatic and whether or not that spreads. And if indeed the CDC is correct that 50% of all of this is something we can take care of by wearing masks, we can avoid by wearing masks, then certainly you would want to wear a mask, no doubt about that. But if the WHO's recent research is correct, then obviously this could have a tremendous impact on public policy in the United States. You know that the science generally supports using masks. You know that. Studies suggest that they could cut down the chances of both transmitting and catching the coronavirus, and many people believe that that's exactly what they do, which is why they wear them. But being more definitive about how well they work or when to use them, scientists will not discuss this very often, but they will have to admit that's when it gets more complicated. There are many types of masks worn in a variety of environments. There are questions about people's willingness to wear them or to wear them properly, as we talked about. Even the question of what kinds of studies would provide definitive proof is hard to answer. There are lots of studies, more of them coming along all the time. None of them definitive, and none of them of the scope that would essentially rise to the top of the heap as the quintessential study with respect to masks. This is why the mask debate continues as it does. To summarize the effectiveness of the most popular kind of mask seen during this COVID pandemic, which is the cloth mask, there's an old adage, you probably heard it, about chicken soup as a remedy for colds and flu. And the adage has it that take chicken soup when you have a cold or you have a flu. Not that it will cure it, but it couldn't hurt. And the mask is kind of in that same sort of category now. It couldn't hurt if you wear one. But now let's look at the psychology of the mask. A lot of people wear the mask because, as I told you, they believe that it's the only thing that keeps them from death's doorstep. Other folks wear the mask because they believe that they're helping you stay free from coronavirus by protecting themselves as well as you and not breathing on you, etc., etc. If they have the virus, they know they do. They're not wearing the mask to prevent the virus because they've got it. If they don't have it, they think they're preventing the virus. And they're thinking that you're preventing the virus as well. The problem is that we don't have the ability to decide this particular issue strictly on medical grounds and medical science alone. We also have a constitution. As a constitutional republic, we have certain rights, certain powers, certain privacy. We have certain inalienable rights, if you will, that cannot be taken away even in a crisis situation, as I mentioned at the outset of this broadcast today. Those rights are rights that exist regardless of what the environment is delivering to us in terms of dangers. And individuals have the right to make choices about how they're going to live. This is why the invasive activity of governors and mayors trying to tell you what you can or cannot do inside the confines of your own home are so completely abhorrent to someone like me who is a constitutionalist. If you wear a mask, you wear it because you believe it delivers a benefit, and more power to you if you believe that. If you don't wear a mask because you believe that you are free not to have to do that, and you cannot be told that you must do that sort of thing, especially when the scientific data is just simply not firm enough to be convincing enough for all of us that wearing a mask becomes an automatic response, then don't wear one. You cannot be ordered to do that. I know that the powers that be suggest, oh, that's heresy. You certainly can be, and we're going to, by God, make that happen. I'll tell you this. When it's all over, when this is all passed and the courts are dealing with the myriad of lawsuits and various legal theories, when it comes down to whether the government can mandate you to wear a mask or not mandate you to wear a mask, I believe that most courts are going to throw those cases out and say they could not do that. And if there are convictions for misdemeanors, they're going to throw those misdemeanor convictions out also, because they could not do that. It's not constitutional. And the closing down of businesses and forcing these businesses to do various things that the government says for their own good and for their own safety. I mean, why, for example, do you shut down a gym but leave open a massage parlor? Why do you shut down a hardware store but leave open a marijuana retail? Why do you shut down a church or severely curtail the population's ability to gather there to worship and leave open abortion clinics? Why do you shut down schools when less than 2% of the school population of America is actually threatened by coronavirus? Why do you shut them down? In the end, what is happening is this. More people are applying critical thinking. More people are applying the objective analysis of all this and arriving at conclusions. after evaluation, forming a judgment that, you know what, it doesn't add up. In the end, it doesn't add up. Yes, we want to be safe. Of course we do. We do not want to get sick. We don't want any of our loved ones to get sick either. But if you can't tell me definitively that we won't get sick if we live our lives as close to normal as possible, they're all going to get sick and we're all going to die, if you can't tell me that, and you can't tell me that, then why would I believe that I'm in as much jeopardy as you want me to believe, unless you want to be able to control my behavior? And therein lies the great rub. My thinking is this. In a short while, if they continue to put this pressure on us, there is going to be an explosive backlash. And when that occurs, government is going to have to give in, because the American people won't put up with it any longer. I think we're very close to that threshold. We'll find out, because this isn't going away anytime soon. That's this edition of For Critical Thinkers. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons. Thanks for joining us, by the way, on the first and third Thursdays at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the month of December. We'll be joining you once again for additional programs. Have a happy Thanksgiving and celebrate it the way you want to. Whatever your reason for not celebrating with others or for celebrating with others, it's your right to have that as the underlying purpose for your own existence. That's what being an American is all about. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for tuning in to this edition of For Critical Thinkers. Join Mike Fitzsimmons twice each month for a chance to share your views about important issues that affect our lives. Stay tuned to Spokane Talks for our next scheduled session.